Now on 4, as Zimbabwe spirals ever deeper into repression and starvation, an Unreported World team have just returned from 3 weeks travelling undercover. This programme contains images of brutality from the start, which some viewers may find upsetting.
This is what happens when you protest in Zimbabwe.
Anybody who wants to oppose the policies of the government is systematically being silenced.
This is what happens when you can't afford to eat in Zimbabwe.
They targeted the poor, leaving the rest untouched.
This is what happens when you're an opposition politician in Zimbabwe.
This is a war. We are fighting against people, a dictatorship. We are fighting against people that brutalize their own people.
And there's police with automatic weapons on every corner. We've spent 3 weeks undercover in Zimbabwe, witnessing the terror Robert Mugabe doesn't want you to see. We're in Zimbabwe. It's dangerous for journalists to operate here, and we have to avoid being discovered by the security forces. To meet our first underground contact, we travel on side roads to the edge of a national park.
Okay, where are we going?
For safety, we can't identify our contact. He wants to take us deep into the countryside where, he says, a major tragedy is unfolding. We're taken to an isolated shack. It's home to a group of small children. In charge is a pastor. Again, naming him would be dangerous. He tells us all these children are AIDS orphans, some HIV positive themselves, whom he's found abandoned in the countryside.
Hello? Hello? You're fine? Oh, that's good.
What's your name?
My name is Caroline.
And how old's the little man?
2 years.
2. And how long ago did your mother and father die?
About 14 years.
14 years ago. But you're only 15 now. So you were 1.
Yes.
Do you remember then? Not very much. All these children have lost both parents to AIDS. The pastor has invited us here to show how he's struggling to keep these children alive. What's happening with the prices of food, like your maize meal, cooking oil? What's happening with the prices?
Yeah, the prices is just nearly every day just increasing.
And that's because of inflation? Price rises?
Yeah, price rises.
The pastor tells me that the price of the country's staple food, maize, has risen 6-fold in the past 2 months. Zimbabwe's chronic inflation is currently running at 2,000%. The pastor can't even afford to buy his children shoes.
I am still struggling to get food, to get salt, to get sugar, to get little things. So it's better to live to buy shoes than you buy commodities for them to survive.
The UN says there are 1.3 million AIDS orphans in Zimbabwe. That means 1 in 3 children in the country are living like this. We head off to meet our next contact. Driving around, we notice empty roads, little transport, and we're told of shortages and power cuts. For safety, it's vital to keep moving.
Diesel! Well, it's finished. Yeah,
Just been driving around trying to get some fuel, and it's very, very difficult. The first place we went to didn't have any power, so they couldn't pump it. The second one didn't have any fuel, and we're told to go to another one at the other end of town.
Hello? Do you have any diesel? Nothing.
Finally we find a station. It has a large queue of cars, but when we try to film it, we draw too much attention from police and government spies. Evidence of shortages is embarrassing for Mugabe's government. Just filming this could get us detained. So now we're heading for the country's second biggest city, which is Bulawayo. We're here to meet members of the church and also members of the underground. As we drive into town, we pass the headquarters of ZANU-PF, the ruling party of President Robert Mugabe. Our contacts tell us the government's abuse of power is allowing people to die. We're taken in secret to a township and into a tiny house to see the evidence for ourselves.
Hello.
Our guide is an AIDS activist. We find a family of 6 children living in these 2 cramped rooms. Olivia, are you the oldest girl?
Yeah.
Okay, so you take care of all the family.
Yeah.
What happened to your mum and dad?
They passed away.
Do you know why? The children tell us that both parents and a sister have died of AIDS, leaving them to survive alone. How common is this, where a family is run by the child?
It is very common. I think it is 50% in this township.
50% of
Yes,
the people in
yes.
this township are childhood households.
I can say child-headed and granny-headed family.
And granny-headed.
Yes.
Our guide tells us, like most AIDS orphans here, these children haven't even been tested for HIV. They could be in desperate need of antiretroviral AIDS drugs, drugs their parents didn't get. And what happens with the antiretrovirals for people who are HIV?
It is very hard. If you connect it to the party, it is so easy. If you are not, it is very hard.
So do they check a party for a party card or anything?
Yeah, even a letter.
A letter?
Yeah.
From the party?
Yeah.
And people who have the letter?
Yeah, they're easy go.
People who don't have the card?
Oh, you go to die.
You're going to die?
Yeah, you go to die. Things are tough here.
In Zimbabwe, it appears, surviving an AIDS epidemic depends on your party connections, connections many don't have. The country now has the lowest life expectancy in the world. Driving out of the township, we see more evidence of the country's crisis. No one seems to have a job. In fact, we're told there's 80% unemployment. For those who do work, rising fuel prices mean a day's wage won't cover the cost of getting there. Just driving down one of the main roads leaving Bulawayo, and there's this amazing scene, just hundreds, possibly thousands of people all streaming out of the city, all walking home, we're told, because they just can't afford the bus fare. Most are heading home to shanty towns surrounding the city. These urban slums have become one of Mugabe's main targets of repression. We can't film openly there, so we asked a local pastor whose congregation was badly hit to go and film for us. He tells us these people were dumped here 2 years ago. They were amongst 700,000 urban poor whose homes were demolished by Mugabe in an operation called Drive Out the Trash. He attacked them because he saw them as a political threat.
They sort of targeted, the poor or the suffering, you see, leaving the rest untouched.
Many in his congregation have still not been allowed to go back. Instead, they live in destitution on the edge of Bulawayo. What's happening to those people then today? What condition are most of those people in?
It's really pathetic. They can't help themselves at all. Actually, I discovered that the reason why most of them were having diarrhea and chest pains was because some of them go to scrounge in the dustbins to get food to live.
Are they dying because of that?
Oh yes, yeah.
The pastor shows us malnourished children. A seriously ill woman is brought out of her hut for his camera.
Last year, between June and September, we were burying like 4 every week. Now we're having 1 or 2. no money to buy coffees. Men who have just folded in, wrapped up in blankets. Really, they have nothing.
We'd been undercover in Bulawayo for several days. After meeting some high-profile government critics, it was time to make ourselves scarce. After what we'd seen, luxurious government hotels designed for hundreds of tourists but now empty provide an uncomfortable sanctuary.
Just moving around Zimbabwe, it has this veneer of normalcy. Everything seems quite peaceful and quite calm. But then there are a couple of newspapers which are still managing to get at what's really going on, and they're full of stories of Mugabe's increasing repression. There are stories about journalists who have been abducted, one about a journalist who was abducted and killed, found murdered the next day.
As part of our cover as tourists, we booked a safari. But even here we find evidence of a country in crisis. Zimbabwe's wildlife is one of its greatest natural assets, but rangers tell us many game parks have been handed over to Mugabe's cronies, and illegal hunting has seen animal numbers drop by 40% in the past 7 years. We're also told that hunger has driven some people to kill big game for food. We're heading deeper into the countryside to find out more about why the country is in such a state of collapse. Along the way, we pass fields of failed crops. Zimbabwe used to be Africa's breadbasket, but now cannot even feed itself, a situation made worse by this year's drought. But the main reason is President Mugabe's policy of seizing white farms. We'd arranged to meet one farmer whose land was taken away.
The situation for white farmers here is much more serious than we thought. The white farmers that we've arranged to meet don't want to be identified in any way. We can't even say which area we're in of the country. We can't see them at their homes because people would be watching them. They say that in fact farm invasions are still continuing, and in fact in this area a white farmer's house was invaded by 9 armed guys just 2 days ago.
Most of these fellows when they come are armed, not overtly, they're certainly covered.
Who are they and why do they get the land? Why do they get the land given to them?
All connected to the ruling party.
To ZANU-PF?
Yes, all of them are connected to the ruling party, yes. Without a shadow of doubt.
We'd been given this home video by one farmer whose land was seized. Ruling party members, police and military immediately began dismantling equipment to be sold off for a quick profit. A year on, the farm lies idle. Like most of the seized farms, it no longer produces food or revenue for the government. Most new farm owners are ZANU-PF members and absentee landlords.
You have no interest in farming. Farming is too slow. You don't have the time or the inclinations.
If they're not farming the land properly, what's it meant for the productivity of the country?
Well, this economy is dependent on agriculture. And 70% of the businesses were dependent on agriculture.
So where would the productivity be now? How much would you think would that be down from what it was at its heyday?
Certainly where I farm, it's down to 23% as an empirical figure.
So 23%
of what it was, yes. In doing so, well, no cost is...
The farmer told us all he has left is one building and that he can't afford to leave the country. His sense of being hounded by the government was palpable, to the point where an approaching vehicle sent us diving for cover. Everybody we had spoken to so far seemed terrified, but we've been told that there is a growing resistance among ordinary people. We were taken to a safe house.
We've arranged to meet some women activists at this house here. It's too dangerous for us to go and see them in their area, so they've come to see us. Hi, Jenny. Yeah.
Jenny Williams is the founder of Women of Zimbabwe Arise, formed to protest about the basics, prices, power cuts, access to education.
My life has now been threatened 5 times in police offices by very senior ranking police officers, and I know that if I am abducted, I may not come back alive. I know that very much.
Jenny gave us video of the women's demonstrations in Bulawayo and Harare over the previous year. The footage shows the protests being broken up by the police. What it doesn't show is what happens afterwards. Both of these women were arrested for demonstrating peacefully. Last May, she told me, she and 170 other mothers, some with toddlers, were protesting about school fees when they were taken into custody. The women were forced to stay outside all night in the rain in the open cage with their shirts off, and for 3 days the babies were kept inside the cell. The women were not allowed to change the baby's nappies, and her son came out with bad rash all around his face. So what happened to this lady? She tells me she and her baby grandson were arrested for protesting about the economy. She was beaten repeatedly for 2 days.
Many have had their threatened with rape. The indignity last time many of our members were made to put the banners that we carry in our protests in their mouths, the whole banner shoved in their mouths, and they were being beaten while they were doing that.
As Mugabe tries to hold on to power, what do you think is going to happen here? Is it going to get better or going to get worse?
The thing you must understand about the Zimbabwean government is they're at war with their own people. And so most of the money that could be available in the budgetary systems is put into weapons, tear gas, water cannons, equipping the armed forces, because they are at war with their own people.
The day before Independence Day, which is a big day for the ruling party and Robert Mugabe, and we're noticing there's a lot more police and a lot more soldiers and more serious checkpoints on all the roads. So we're going to try and lay low tomorrow and just stay out of the way. To maintain our tourist cover, we travel to Great Zimbabwe, the country's ancient capital. Anywhere else, this magnificent attraction would be swarming with visitors, but as we've come to expect, it's deserted. In an atmosphere of growing unease, we wait to hear what Mugabe's Independence Day speech to the nation will hold.
As government, our message remains clear that we will never hesitate to deal firmly with those elements who are bent on fomenting anarchy.
Mugabe's words are no empty threat. Opposition figures and critics have already been beaten. As we head into the capital, Harare, we know it will be the most dangerous part of our trip.
There's police everywhere, and on just about every corner we're noticing police, 2 police officers filling up with automatic weapons. It's quite a heavy presence.
It was here, just days before we arrived in Zimbabwe, that members of the political opposition, the Movement for Democratic Change, or MDC, had been badly beaten by Mugabe's police.
Stay there, stay there.
We want to meet the opposition, but our contacts told us a new crackdown is underway, and journalists too are now being targeted.
There's a real sense here that the net is closing around the opposition. The people we spoke to in Bulawayo, a number of them have been arrested. The people who helped us get to the orphanage recently have been told to flee because the police are onto them, and all the people we want to go and see today fear that they're being watched and listened to.
We decide to risk seeing them anyway, and we're taken to another safe house. But the people we're expecting are targets, and we're not sure if they'll get to us safely. If we are caught interviewing opposition figures, both they and we could be jailed or worse. Our first meeting is with Gift Perry, a journalist who just a few weeks ago was arrested for writing articles critical of Mugabe's government.
They forced me to lie down. They handcuffed me. He had one guy with his boot on my head, and the other one, he was stepping on my legs. I mean, he was standing on my legs. So yes, so I was lying down, face down, and then they took out a 1 meter rubber truncheon, started beating me on my buttocks, on my thighs. The pain was excruciating. I was screaming, I was yelling in there, but they didn't stop. They continued beating me. They continued asking me about my sources, but then I obviously had to protect my sources. There was no way I was going to betray, my confidences.
What was going through your mind then when you were in there, held incommunicado after those beatings?
Oh, I was fearing for the West. Anybody who wants to oppose the policies of the government is systematically being silenced through harassment, intimidation, even abductions, torture, even murder.
The MDC gave us these pictures of what happened when the government launched its crackdown on March the 11th this year. 50 of its members were hospitalised after being beaten brutally by police. Now we're waiting to meet a member of the MDC itself.
Overnight we've heard that 3 MDC opposition party members have been abducted by police. Nobody knows where they are.
Hi.
I'm Evan.
I'm Priscilla.
Nice to meet you, Priscilla. How are you?
After an anxious wait, our MDC contact arrives. Priscilla Misiherabwe Mashonga is a sitting MP, but that offers her little protection. All MDC members are now targets.
People are being picked up in the middle of the night. Some of them are picked during the day. And these people are not putting on any uniform. You can't say they're soldiers, you can say they're police. They are usually taken at gunpoint. They are driven to some places, in some bush. They are beaten thoroughly. The families do not know where they are supposed to be. And I think the sad thing is you can't even advise them to go and report the issue to the police because it's part of the state that is doing these kinds of things. What is happening is that you are disabling a whole movement because if you are attacking the leadership, if you are attacking those that are at a grassroots level, then you basically are making it impossible to create a movement that can stand up to the regime. This is a war. We are fighting against people, a dictatorship. We are fighting against people that brutalize their own people.
Zimbabwe is a nation of stunning potential, and as tourists we've seen some of its most beautiful sights. But it's been a tour through a country gripped by fear. We put what we'd found here to the Zimbabwean embassy in London. They declined to respond. When Robert Mugabe took power in 1980, he was hailed as a revolutionary hero against racist white minority rule. Before we left Zimbabwe, we were taken to a small village to meet one of his fellow revolutionary fighters, a 62-year-old grandmother called Mary. Sitting with a young neighbour, she tells us both generations feel life has become unbearable. She says the people feel utterly betrayed. She tells me when Mugabe took over the country, they felt full of hope and that they were being led to a promised land.
Under his leadership, the country has gradually deteriorated to the point now where it's in such a state of devastation they don't believe it can ever go back to where it was.
As time goes on, if it continues like this way, something will happen. Something bad will happen. People will die.
Next on 4, a 3-minute wonder made in India.